What we're going to be covering today is the fundamentals of the rotation property. So how we can actually rotate our layers and compositions and shapes in After Effects, what the basics of rotation are, what they're calculated in, and how we can actually animate this over a set period of time. At the end, we might also cover one or two expressions that can make your life much easier when it comes to rotation. Great, so I have After Effects open. Hopefully you have After Effects open too, so you can follow along with this tutorial. So I've already created a shape in advance, which is a hexagon. And one of the things to bear in mind with the rotation is the position of the anchor point. So obviously wherever the anchor point is going to be the point from which the shape is rotated. So one of the things to bear in mind before you start actually animating the rotation is to make sure that the anchor point is in the place where you want it to be. Now, I have already made a video on how anchor points work, so I'd highly recommend for you to check that out in order for you to place your anchor point in the position from which you want to rotate your object. So in order to bring up the rotation properties for this layer, all you have to do is press R on your keyboard. And as you can see at the bottom in our timeline, we now have another property which says rotation with a small stopwatch to the left of it and then two values on the right. So when we're dealing with rotation, there are two properties that we can adjust. The value on the left is the number of rotations that we have completed. So at the moment, it's set to 0 times because we haven't actually rotated the shape at all. But for example, if we made one full rotation, it would say 1. If we made 2 rotations, it'd say 2 and so forth. Then on the right of that, we have degrees, as you can see with the small degree symbol in the top right-hand corner. And obviously when we rotate things, there are a certain amount of degrees by which we can rotate it. If you want to make a full rotation, then it's going to be 360 degrees. If we want to rotate it halfway, it'll be 180 degrees, right 90 degrees, left 270 degrees. So it's very, very handy if you are going to be rotating on a regular basis, just to know these set values so you can quickly apply them anytime. Now, as you can see, just to the left of that, we have a plus symbol. And this basically means it's going to be adding on degrees. So what you can also do is actually subtract a set amount of degrees. So what this means is when it actually says plus, it's going to actually rotate our layer to the right. If it says negative, if it goes into negative values, it's going to rotate to the left. So just to demonstrate this, if I hover over this degree symbol, as you can see, my cursor changes to two arrows pointing right and left. If I hold and drag to the right, just using my left mouse key, as you can see, it now says plus 45, and in that time, our shape has rotated to the right. Now, vice versa, if I went the other way, as you can see, it's rotating to the left, and I can actually go into negative values, so I'm now almost at negative 45, and I've actually rotated it negative 45 degrees to the left. So this is just a key principle that you have to understand. Now, if I wanted to rotate the image by one full rotation, I could either type in 360 degrees, which as we know is one full rotation. And as you can see, we now have 1 times. So we've rotated this layer by 360 degrees once. As you can see, there was no visible change because if you rotate this layer 360 degrees, it's obviously going to go back to its original position. But if this was 2, then it's actually rotated 360 degrees twice. So in total, 720 degrees. I'm just going to reset that to 0. I think the easiest way to explain this is actually by creating an animation. So what we're going to do is just press on the stopwatch just to the left of the word rotation. And then this creates an initial keyframe where our indicator was placed, which was at 0 frames and 0 seconds. So let's start off by applying a very simple rotation using just the left value. So for example, if we say at 3 seconds, we want our shape to have rotated by 1 full rotation. So 1 full 360 degree rotation. Well, then all we have to do is type in 1 to give it 1 full rotation. And as you can see, if your indicator is at 3 seconds, it's now created a second keyframe. And if I just quickly drag our indicator all the way back to 0 seconds and 0 frames, and then just press spacebar on my keyboard to start the animation, as you can see, it's now rotating our hexagon a full 360 degrees in that time. So this is the first way you can actually apply a rotation to your layer. And as you can see, when it reaches 3 seconds, there's no more rotation being applied because we have no further keyframes later on, which then means our hexagon stops and it obviously sits in that last position. Say I only wanted it to rotate 90 degrees within that time, so let's go to 3 seconds again. and then just type 90 in this degree value input, and then go back to the start and press play. Just wait for a second for it to render, and then press play again. As you can see, now it only rotates 90 degrees within this time period. Now, obviously, you can also use both at the same time. So for example, you could say, by 3 seconds, I actually want you to do one full rotation plus 90 degrees, which is a total rotation of 450 degrees. So I can press play and wait for it to render. And as you can see, it's now going to rotate a full 450 degrees within that time period. So even though it only says plus 90, because we have a 1 times, this means it's rotated 360 degrees plus 90 on top of that. Now, what you can also use this initial one for is you can also just use this to set the initial rotation. So we don't have to start the rotation on 0 degrees and 0 times. We can start it on 43 degrees. And then obviously it's just going to change that rotation within that period. So that's just another great way to change the initial rotation. So those are the fundamentals of how to actually rotate a shape using keyframes. But there are things called expressions which make it much easier for us to rotate it on a more consistent basis. So if I just quickly delete these keyframes, a quick way to do that is either to select both of them just by holding and dragging your left mouse key, or you can actually press on the stopwatch which we initially used to create the keyframes. And then as you can see, those keyframes have also disappeared. I'm just going to quickly reset our rotation to 0, 0. And then what we're going to do is create an expression. So in order to create an expression on this rotation property, all you have to do is hover over the stopwatch, hold Option on Mac or Alt for Windows, and then just press on the stopwatch once. And as you can see, it's now created an expression under the property of rotation. So there are 2 expressions that I'm going to show you to start off with. The first one is the loopOut expression. So what we're going to do is just type in loopOut. As you can see, it's that third option in the dropdown. And then just press enter. And then just press off our expression. Now, as you can see, at the moment, there is a caution icon. And this is because we haven't actually got any keyframes on our thing for it to actually loop. So what we're going to do is just quickly create some keyframes. So we're going to press on the stopwatch once again in order to create an initial expression. And then what we're going to do is drag our indicator to 1 second. And let's actually go the other way this time. Let's go at -1 degree. And this means it's actually going to rotate to the left this time instead of going to the right. Now, what we currently know is going to happen, like we had before, is between these 2 keyframes, there's going to be a transition in which our shape is going to rotate to the left. But what if we want the rotation to actually keep on going? We don't actually want to have to go to the end of our composition and create a keyframe and then set a very, very high number for it to rotate that certain amount of time. If you have a composition that is very, very long, say it was 5 minutes long, you don't want to have to type in 300 rotations and calculate exactly how many rotations you're going to have to be doing. An easy way to do it is just to create 2 keyframes that we can actually then loop on further. So if you're happy with the rotation speed between these 2 keyframes, what the loopOut expression is actually going to do is by the end of the last keyframe, it's actually going to start and go back to the initial keyframe and then just loop that process. It's slightly hard to explain, but basically if we just play this animation, we can see that it's rotating between our initial keyframes, but the rotation is actually also continuing later. And this is because it's actually looping out this animation after these points. So this is just an easy way to create a constant rotation that is going to keep going for the length of your composition. Furthermore, if we adjust this initial keyframe, let's say we added another keyframe, I'm going to actually go and create a slightly less fast spinning object. Let's say it rotates by 60 degrees to the left, and then it actually rotates back another 60 degrees. So we go back to 0. So we now have 3 keyframes. Well, just like before, this loopOut expression is going to take into account all of the keyframes. And then by the end of the final keyframe that you have, it's going to start back at the beginning and keep going. So if we just go like this, it's going to rotate to the left, going to rotate to the right, and then go left and right again, and so forth. So this is just a very, very quick way to be able to create lots of rotation without having to keyframe this loads and loads of times. Now finally, another expression that I want to show you is if we just quickly get rid of these keyframes and go back to 0, 0, 0, we will keep the expressions open, but we're going to change the expression that we have. So the property that we're going to be using is time. So if I type in time, as you can see, it already comes up as an option, and just leave it like this for now. How the time expression works is it's a value. So the value of time is going to be whatever the time is at that moment. So if we're 1 second into the video, the time is going to be 1. If it's going to be 2 seconds into the video, the value of time is going to be 2. So time is basically a number that we can then use, which changes over the course of time. It's slightly hard to explain, but hopefully it will make a bit more sense when we actually apply some animation. So for example, what we can do is we can actually multiply this number of time by a certain amount of degrees. So in order to multiply anything in After Effects, what you have to do is create this small star, which for me is holding Shift and pressing on the key 8 on my keyboard. And then we can input a certain amount of degrees. So let's say we want to multiply it by 30. So what we have is we have time times 30. I'm just going to quickly press off of this expression. So what we have is the number that's going to be created within this expression is going to be inputted within these degrees. So we're going to have time times 30. So if we're at 0 seconds, it's going to be 0 times 30, which is obviously 0. So at 0 seconds, it's going to be 0. When we jump to 1 second, well, the time is going to be 1 because we're at 1 second. So it's going to be 1 times 30, which is 30 degrees. Furthermore, if we go to 2, it's going to be 2 times 30 because we're at 2 seconds. 2 times 30 is 60, and then we have 60. So as you can see, if I just press play on my keyboard and let it render slightly longer, as you can see, it's now going to rotate at a consistent speed over time. So this is just a very quick and easy way for you to rotate your layer at a constant speed over time. If I wanted it to go quicker, well, obviously what I could do is I can make this number much, much higher. So let's say 100. And as you can see, when I press play, it's now going to actually rotate much, much quicker. So when we're at 0 seconds, it's going to be 0 times 100, which is 0. 1 second, 1 times 100, which is 100. If I go to 4 seconds, it's going to be 4 times 100, which is 400. And remember, this is expressed as 360 degrees, so one full rotation, plus another 40, which makes up for that last 40 to make 400. So those were the fundamentals of how to use rotation in After Effects. So what we covered was how you can actually find the rotation properties, how the rotation property is actually calculated, so the number of rotations and the amount of degrees, how you can keyframe a simple rotation, and then 2 simple expressions, the first of which was loopOut, which actually duplicates your keyframes and loops them over a period of time. And then we also had time times a certain value or a certain degree, which actually rotates your layer at a more constant speed over a greater period of time. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you're interested in learning how you can actually apply motion blur to your animations in After Effects, then do check out the video in the top right-hand corner of the end screen. And otherwise, do remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed the content, and do subscribe to make sure you never miss a new After Effects tutorial.